Hello and welcome to this special discussion on a special book which has come to the market called Who Moved My Interest Rate? Now, why this book is interesting is it's been written by the former RBI Governor Dr. Duvvuri Subbarao, and Mr. Subbarao became RBI Governor in very special circumstances. He calls it baptism by fire. There's a chapter which says it was baptism by fire because the month he took over as Governor RBI in 2008 September, within a week or 10 days of that, the world was hit by the global financial crisis, the contagion which spread to the rest of the world. So he literally walked into that situation, and from there on, it had been a roller coaster ride for Dr. Subbarao, which he captures adequately and beautiful in this book. Very well written, very accessible, and he talks about how he managed the RBI, how he managed various conflicting situations within the country, between RBI and the government, how he managed the RBI and the central bank's responsibilities while also taking care of global imperatives, because G20 was very active. There was global coordination of monetary policy, and it was a really turbulent time. So to discuss that and much more, we have with us Dr. Subbarao. Welcome to our show, Dr. Subbarao. So
thank you very much. Thank you for the opportunity of the interview.
Yeah. So your book is really it's become a subject of discussion or talk of the town, as it were. Also because we are currently looking at the relationship between the current RBI governor and and the NDA and the centre. And after reading your book, one gets the feeling that some of the problems that you had highlighted in your book, they very much exist even today. Problems have not gone away. Whether you take inflation, whether you take exchange rate management, the exchange rate was under pressure recently. There's a full chapter in your book on the 2013 exchange rate taper tantrums related problems. So how do you see what you've written in the book, some of your conclusions, and what is happening now?
Well, there are challenges all the time, and inflation, tension between growth and inflation, and managing that tension, managing the exchange rate, looking after the health of the public sector, of the banking system, regulation. All of this are at the heart of the mandate of the Reserve Bank, and there are always challenges. But as you said, the intensity of the challenge varies from time to time, and what is the foremost challenge varies from time to time. For example, I had the global financial crisis, then inflation, which is persistent, stubborn, and the highest in a decade. And then we had the rupee tantrums, and when the Reserve Bank had to mount a massive defense of the exchange rate. Whereas during the current time, Governor Rajan, his biggest problem is the NPA issue and cleaning up the balance sheets of the banks so that investment can take off once again, because banks will start lending.
And growth.
And of course, growth. So to some extent, challenges are always there. To some extent, these tensions between central banks and governments, they're not unique to India. They were not unique to my time. They're all the time there. They're in every country. And what is different about our country is the way we manage those challenges and manage the relationship between the government and the central bank.
Okay. So you've said in one of your chapters that the tension between the Reserve Bank as an institution and the centre, let's say finance minister or the prime minister's office, is nothing new.
Right.
In fact, you have quoted historical examples which I found very fascinating.
From the Reserve Bank?
Yeah, Benedal Rao in 1956 under Nehru's
Yeah.
cabinet, he had to quit.
Right.
Because he couldn't, TTK Krishnamachari, then finance minister,
Correct.
just could not, they couldn't see eye to eye.
That's right.
And before that, there was a British
Yes.
governor, governor who had to also quit,
Right.
because there was tension. So if you see those examples, to me it seems that institutions have matured. We don't see those kind of very
Right.
jerky developments where people
Correct.
where governors quit in a huff. That
Right.
doesn't happen today, right?
Yeah,
So
it doesn't happen so much, but the tensions
tensions are always
are
there.
there. And again, I want to say that it's not as if one side is right and the other side is wrong.
Yeah.
That tension is inherent
Okay.
in the motivation and in the objectives of both the government and the Reserve Bank. The government is more interested typically in short-term growth,
Yeah.
whereas the Reserve Bank, by its mandate, is enjoined to pursue price stability as that is a necessary condition for long-term sustainable growth.
What I find very fascinating, Dr. Subbarao, is Raghuram Rajan is using exactly your language while dealing with his disagreements with the center today. You always said that the RBI is for growth, but it tries to focus on inflation stability to create sustained growth in the medium to long term.
Right.
Right. Raghuram Rajan has been saying the same thing. So, how do you see these parallels playing out?
Well, I think Governor Rajan's situation is slightly different from mine because
But the argument is making the same.
the argument is the same, yes.
Yeah.
But my situation was that growth was moderating steeply and inflation was raging relentlessly.
Yeah.
So the tension between growth and inflation was much more intense
Much more intense.
at that time than today, when growth is accelerating. It may not be 7.6%. That's
Is it accelerating? Some people say it is
It's disputed, but certainly
marginally on the uptick, but still stagnant. Yeah.
but still accelerating, right? It may not be 7.6%, but it's on the uptrend. Whereas inflation has certainly come down at the 5.8% or 6%. It is still beyond the Reserve Bank's comfort zone. But it's not abnormally high, like 8 or 9% or even double-digit inflation, which I had encountered. So the growth inflation tension that Governor Rajan is experiencing today is different from the one I had. But at its heart, the problem is similar. Yes, there's a parallel at some level, but there's no parallel in the intensity of the problem.
situation. Yeah.
That's right.
But tell me, you have spoken in your book, you've elaborated how bad data or uncertain data creates huge problem in conduct of monetary policy.
Right.
Now, and you just said that during your time growth was
Moderating.
decelerating,
Right.
whereas in the current phase, at least Mr. Rajan has experiencing marginal uptick in growth.
Right.
But if you look at the new GDP series, one could argue that even you in 2012, you would not have known that in 13, 14 or in early 13 or mid 13, 2013, you would not have known that 13, 14 would show 7% growth.
That's right.
That's the revised GDP. So do you think that if you had known that 13, 14 would give you 6.9 or 7% growth, you would have conducted the policy
Oh
differently?
yeah, most certainly.
Yeah.
You know, with the benefit of hindsight, especially when real-time data is inaccurate, with the benefit of hindsight, you certainly believe that you could have done things differently. You talk about 2012-13 when we were wrong-footed.
Yeah.
But a more gross example of being wrong-footed by data was during the exit phase when we were exiting from the expansionary policy of the crisis.
Yeah.
In 2009, 10, 11, when inflation was very persistent, quite high, and in spite of the tightening not coming down. And we were acting based on real-time data, which was telling us that even though recovery was going on, it was not as robust as we would have liked it to be. Therefore, we had to be quite cautious in tightening policy. But subsequently, we realized that growth, in fact, had recovered quite rapidly. In fact, we had a V-shaped recovery. If we'd known that in real time,
You didn't expect that V-shaped recovery.
that's right. I
So
certainly
you would have you would have increased interest rates faster.
yes, and I would have avoided this moniker of baby step Subbarao.
Yeah. I remember I used to interact with you when you were governor then, and in your pre-monetary policy brainstorming that you had.
Right.
I used to be invited on a few occasions, and that's when you unveiled this baby steps
Right.
policy, for which you were criticized. Now, one criticism against this baby steps was that you become too predictable.
That's right.
If you tell the market that you're going to, in any case, do 0.25,
Yeah.
25 basis, so where do you have the element of surprise as a central banker? Was that an issue?
I don't know, because there are two views about it. Some governors, some central banks believe that surprise has to be an element of monetary policy.
Yeah.
There are others who
Predictability is a-
extreme on be absolutely predictable. In fact, central banks today have come so far towards predictability that they say this time we have not done anything, but next time we will do something.
Yeah.
And in fact, giving an advance alert about what they might do the next time round.
Yeah.
So there is no settled theory on whether you must always have an element of surprise or always be predictable. My own take on that is that you go as the situation demands, without a preconceived policy ideology about being predictable or being surprising. You decide what you believe is the best thing to do. But if you force me, I would say that I would veer more towards predictability than surprise.
Okay. The other issue that I want to speak to you about, which you mentioned in your book, is that during that phase, 2000, after the crisis, 2008 onwards, until 2012-13, nobody really could predict what was going on. I remember you used to
around the world or in
around the
India?
world, yeah,
Yes.
around the world. Whether it was about growth, whether it was inflation,
Or recovery, or financial stability, market performance,
As your
exchange rates.
deputy governor,
Yes.
Shubir Gokan just said in a discussion today that even the IMF got it wrong, right?
Right.
So was it would you say it was special kind of circumstances, special, it was a particular phase where even if you had data, predictability was very, very weak. Predicting what was going to happen was extremely difficult.
I think so. You could attribute part of the policy confusion to that lack of predictability, because I would say more uncertainty.
More uncertainty.
About not only the macroeconomic parameters like growth and inflation, but also about market behavior.
Market behavior.
So central banks around the world were operating in a situation of extreme uncertainty.
Yeah.
So like you said, even if there was accurate data at that point of time, what action was warranted by that data was quite uncertain.
Quite uncertain, right?
Right.
Because I remember in one of those meetings that you had with us in RBI, those brainstorming meetings, you once said that you would go to the spring meeting of IMF, they would say something, and then you would go, within 6 months everything would change. You go
Right.
to the September meeting, you'll come over with a completely different set of
Absolutely.
forecasts, predictions, right?
Yeah.
So
Not only forecasts and predictions, but also about the policy prescriptions.
yeah, even in the 6 months time frame,
Right.
everything would change, right?
A very high profile example of that is the IMF's view on fiscal austerity.
Yeah.
Remember,
Yeah.
during the early phases of the Eurozone crisis, fiscal austerity was the mantra that every country that got into trouble had to get into fiscal austerity program. But within 6 months or 1 year later, they realized that the fiscal multipliers, as they call them, which is a technical term for the impact of the fiscal austerity on growth, was much higher than their original calculations had shown.
Okay.
So the policy prescription had changed.
Okay.
Now you could criticize that in some sense.
No,
or
one is
you
not
could-
criticizing. One is just
you
saying
could
that.
take that as an example of policy flexibility. You go as you learn more, you become more flexible in your policy prescription.
And then you say in your book that when you took over as RBI governor, you were seen as somebody coming from the center, a bureaucrat, worked as finance secretary, and therefore you felt that 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 within RBI you would be seen as probably following the centre's mandate, or
Right.
you had to establish certain
Both within the markets and
credibility with the RBI staff
Right.
and the markets, right?
Right.
And now, in that context, I want to ask you: the crisis happened, and you went to Washington, where you
Right.
talk about the G20 meeting, where George Bush walked into
Yeah.
unannounced into the meeting,
Right.
while you were giving your address, and
Not my address so much as my comments.
comments, yeah. And that was a time when G20 decided that all the countries will coordinate
Right.
policy, and they'll both fiscal and monetary push will be together.
Right.
Extraordinary situation, etc. And then you come back to RBI, and then you decide to cut interest rates, and then you say in your book that your RBI senior staff actually initially opposed the cuts. No, in that sense, some of them, yeah.
Yes.
So, so how did you deal with that? So, did you have to sort of convince them very hard, or
No,
how
you
did
try
you
your best,
establish your equation with them?
My style of management is collegial.
Collegial,
To the
yeah.
extent possible, you encourage your staff to give their opinion freely. You not only encourage them to give their opinion freely, but you also allow them to debate the policy options with you. And if to the extent that they have a point, you change your point of view.
Okay.
But eventually, if you believe that something has to be done, because that's what your judgment says,
Yeah.
and that you believe is in the larger public interest, even if that is at variance with the majority view, you do that. Ultimately, the governor makes the call, and he's the leader.
Yeah.
So he has
The
to
buck
be
stops with you.
That's right. He has to be responsible.
And
for
you,
the decisions he makes.
within the first 4 months that of your taking over, which is September of 2008,
Right.
if I'm not mistaken, you cut interest rates by about 4 percentage points.
I think so. From 8% to
From
something
9 to
like
5.
9 to 3.5 actually. It is
Yeah, yeah.
much more drastic. I
And-
don't know if it happened in the 4-month period.
Oh, say roughly
Yeah.
6-7 months.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And you completely, in that sense, you reversed that was the amount of interest rate hikes that Dr. Reddy had done in the previous 4-5 years, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
I have what I had reversed in a matter of 4 months,
Mm-hmm.
was, or 5 months for that matter, is what he had done to raise in 5 years. So I had undone.
So it
In
was
5
your
months.
response to the crisis.
It is my response to the crisis, and in line with the extraordinary.
So your
policy
your
action.
RBI staff, the top brass, they went along with you, or
Oh yeah.
more
they,
or less,
they
yeah.
do go along with you. You know, it is not as if we become adversarial.
No, but,
Yeah.
but there could be disagreements from within.
There could be
Like
disagreement.
the technical advisory committee.
But these were all professional disagreements which we could manage.
Okay, and subsequently when you saw the inflation rearing its head, and
Right.
food inflation really unprecedented, as Mr. Shubir Gokan said in the previous discussion he
Right.
had with you. Not after the 1960s had you seen such high food inflation.
Right.
So that's when you had to start raising interest rates, is it?
Yes.
Yeah.
See, raising interest rates was always on the cards because we had had a very expansionary policy during the crisis in response to the crisis, and we had to bring back the rates to what the market called neutral or normal rates. So raising interest rates was always on the cards.
It's all in the cards.
Right. But the roadmap for raising interest rates was motivated or driven by the trajectory of inflation.
Okay. That's when you devised your baby steps. When you
That's
raised
right.
13 times when you raised
Right.
interest
I mean,
rates.
it's not as if the baby step, 13 step was
Yeah.
pre-programmed. It
Yeah.
was response to the situation as it evolved.
As it evolved. But you followed a kind of gradualist approach.
That's right. And I explained the reasons for why I followed a gradualist approach.
Tell me, after you raised interest rates, there was immense pressure on you in 2012, which you describe in the book, to cut interest rates. Pressure coming from Delhi. Pranab Mukherjee was the finance minister, and you cite a very interesting anecdote where you say that you, against market expectations, you cut interest rates by 50 basis points, and Pranab Mukherjee was very happy. In fact, he announced the cut at a FICCI function in Delhi even before your press conference could happen. So So you said that it was probably an indiscretion committed by the minister. Normally, it's out of line for the minister
Right.
to preempt the
Right.
RBI governor, right?
Right.
So was it? So did you have a discussion with Mr. Mukherjee later on that? No.
No, I don't recall having a discussion.
Mm-hmm.
But even that 50 basis points cut as against the market expectation of 25 basis points, it is a close call.
Close call.
Within the RBI itself, both options were discussed. Every time we had to make a decision, it was a close call. But on this instance, it was much closer than on other occasions. Left to myself, I had done 25 basis points, but I had deferred not to the pressure from the finance minister, certainly not, but I deferred to the assurance.
Yeah, you mentioned that.
Yeah, from
that
the
he
finance
would
minister that
bring
he
down
would-
the fiscal
yes.
deficit
Right.
gradually.
That and in acknowledgement of that, I must cut interest rate in advance.
So it was an IOU you got from
That's right.
Finance Minister Pranab Mukherjee that he will
Act.
reduce the fiscal deficit, and you were doing it in anticipation of that.
Right. So he
But
requested.
you were somewhat disappointed because that did not happen.
That did not
in the
happen.
way that you had expected.
That's right. He had asked me to front load the monetary policy cut, and that he would act, and that's quite understandable because fiscal deficit correction takes much longer, whereas a monetary policy action can be done abruptly. So I deferred to him on his assurance, and then political developments took over. He became
Absolutely.
the president, and he moved on.
I remember speaking to you those days, Mr. Subbarao, and you always used to ask me as to how do the poor in this country tolerate such high food inflation, you know.
Right.
And those days food inflation would be 15% plus.
Right.
Now, again, another parallel from then and now. You used to talk about food inflation resulting in creating inflationary expectations, which could also create
Generalized inflation.
generalized inflation. Raghuram Rajan speaks about the same thing today, food inflation. He's also been in the last 1.5 2 years talking
Right.
a lot about food inflation. So that's one problem which has not gone away, because as you said, as you say in the book, food constitutes about 70% of the, or little more of the consumption basket of probably 900
the poorer the country, the
800
higher.
million people.
Right.
So how do you handle this dichotomy? You know, you talked about this in some other discussions around your book, that you have to look at people who consume food, where 70%, 80% of their incomes go towards buying
Right.
food, and today we have dal prices at 150 200 a
Right.
kilo. Same problem, protein problem that you
Yeah.
spoke about then, and so how do you deal with this?
Well, how you deal with it with the instruments available to you, which
Yeah.
is bring inflation down, because we know inflation is a very regressive tax. It hurts poor people more
Yeah.
than it hurts well-off people. They suffer the most.
Yeah.
And I think the Reserve Bank has to be sensitive to the concerns of this silent majority
Sure.
whose voice does not get heard.
And the pensioners, the fixed income earners,
Right.
are also part of the silent majority
Silent
because they're
majority.
scattered.
Whereas there's
They
a
don't
vocal-
lobby like industrialists
Right.
do, right?
There's a vocal minority
Yeah.
who have the platform, who have the capability of voicing their point of view. I don't say that's illegitimate, that's a very legitimate concern, but they have the mechanisms for getting heard,
Yeah.
which this large majority, like you said, is scattered and unorganized,
Unorganized,
so
yeah.
they cannot get their point of view.
And I'm not surprised that even Raghuram Rajan has been emphasizing this point
Oh, yeah.
time and again, that how do I, even if I cut interest rates for businesses, their balance sheets will improve, but how do I deal with fixed income earners?
Right.
How can you
Yeah,
how can you give them an interest rate which in real terms could be
That's
negative,
right.
you know?
If two governors talk about it, you should take that as an institutional concern
Yeah.
of the Reserve Bank, independent of the governors.
Yeah,
You know, the Reserve Bank is more sensitive to equity issues than it's commonly given credit for.
Yeah. So that's what I'm saying. So when I say your language and Raghuram Rajan's language, they seem, even if situations are different qualitatively, the language is still the same,
Yeah.
similar language, and in some sense,
And
in some sense, the tension between RBI and centre, I would suggest is probably it has spilled out in the public space much more today than it did earlier during your time.
That is true. Yes.
How do you read that? The way some of the some members of parliament belonging to the ruling party have been talking about Raghuram Rajan.
I know, but I do not have a very informed comment about it. I think it's the Reserve Bank.
Is it good for the institution, such public spat? I'm telling you why I'm asking you this. Because your book also mentions a stage when publicly Delhi policymakers were talking about RBI,
right.
But Manmohan Singh, you say that Prime Minister Manmohan Singh stepped in and he told them to shut up.
Right.
So do you think a similar thing needs to be done?
Well, I can't,
now? Although it was done partly.
But public spats are never good, right? There should be mechanisms for managing disagreements before they become disagreeable. Certainly there will be differences, and I don't think we should hold back our differences. And I think politicians are right to speak about the differences, criticize the Reserve Bank's policy, but all that criticism has to be at the professional level, on the content of the policy, but should not go to a personal level of questioning the credentials of the institution or of the governor.
And do you feel another parallel between your time and now? During your time also, attempts were made to create new institutions for financial regulation, which was seen as diluting somewhat the RBI's role or RBI governor's role. Financial Sector Development Council,
right.
etc.
FSLRC. FSDC.
FSDC.
Financial Stability Development.
Financial
Stability and Development Council.
So on that you had an interaction with Pranab Mukherjee, and you came to some kind of middle ground, and Pranab Mukherjee as finance minister said, okay, this will only be used at times of crisis. It's not some regular.
That's right.
Right.
Yeah.
Now similar things are happening now with Monetary Policy Committee and other institutions which are sought to be
established,
which you have mentioned in the context of the financial sector reforms, regulatory reforms commission. Many of the proposals there are also being seen as kind of impinging on the institutional, the traditional authority of the RBI. So how do you see all these? Is it a centre versus RBI bargaining play, or is there something more serious going on?
No, I think some of these institutional initiatives are good. For example, the Monetary Policy Committee, inflation targeting. And indeed, some of the recommendations at the FSLRC are good. Like, for example, giving primacy to consumer protection and focusing on financial stability. All of them are good. And even if there are differences of view on how institutions must evolve, I think there must be a healthy debate on that. It should not be personalized, and it should be seen as that debate running on objective lines.
Absolutely.
No, democracy thrives on debate, and I don't think we should shun debate as such, as we must shun a debate that goes beyond objective considerations.
So finally, just one last question. What would you say to the new RBI governor who will take charge? Of course, he'll read your book, because your book.
I hope so. It means a lot to me.
It's the first. No, it's the first book by a governor.
By a former governor.
By a former governor, and giving a lot of insights on the various relationships between.
I think so.
Various institutions, and I see this as a primer for all future governors. So what would be your advice?
It's an exaggeration, but I hope the incoming governor reads this book, if he or she has not already read it. It is presumptuous on my part to give advice to an unknown new governor, but since you ask, I will say, keep an open mind, listen to everyone, listen to all the stakeholders with respect, with open mind. Listen to the government as well, because the government is a big stakeholder in the Reserve Bank's policies. After having listened, make your judgment call based on what you believe is the larger public interest, because ultimately you are accountable to your conscience.
Thank you very much for talking to us, Dr. Subbarao. It's a pleasure having you at the Wire premises. Thanks a lot.
Thank you for inviting me. It's a great opportunity.
That's all we have for now. Thank you.